They say you can never truly go home again. But sometimes home drags you back, kicking and screaming. For me, that home was Blackwood Creek, a place nestled deep in the Appalachian folds, smelling of damp earth, coal dust, and forgotten dreams. I'd escaped years ago, trading the suffocating familiarity for the anonymous energy of the city. But a call about my ailing father pulled me back onto those winding, fog-choked roads. I drove into the night, into the past, dread coiling in my gut like a cold serpent, unaware that the mist clinging to the hollows held more than just memories. It held watchers. And one, in particular, was waiting on the bridge. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The old sedan coughed, a geriatric rattle against the oppressive silence of the West Virginia backroads. My hands, slick with sweat despite the biting late October chill, clenched the worn steering wheel. Blackwood Creek. Even the name tasted like rust and regret on my tongue. 8 years. 8 years since I'd put this town in my rearview mirror, swearing I'd never look back. Now, here I was, crawling towards it like a supplicant, drawn by the fading signal of my father's life. He was in the county hospital, a shadow of the man who'd haunted my childhood with his silences and simmering resentments. A stroke, my aunt had said over the crackling line, her voice tight with the weary resignation that seemed endemic to this place. He's asking for you, Sarah. Asking? Or demanding, even from his sickbed? It didn't matter. Duty, that heavy Appalachian quilt woven with guilt and obligation, smothered my reluctance. I built a life away from here, a career as a photojournalist capturing other people's dramas instead of drowning in my own. Blackwood Creek represented everything I'd fled, the shuttered storefronts whispering of economic decay, the claustrophobic certainty that everyone knew your business, the weight of generations pressing down like the mountains themselves. It was a town perpetually waiting for the other shoe to drop, the mine closing for good, the river flooding again, the next tragedy unfolding with grim predictability. As I navigated the serpentine curves of Route 119, the fog began its insidious crawl. It wasn't the gentle mist of coastal mornings, this was Appalachian fog, thick as buttermilk, swirling up from the hollows and ravines like something exhaled from the earth itself. It swallowed the road markers, turned the towering pines into indistinct specters, and muffled the already scarce sounds of the night. My headlights punched feeble holes in the white wall, reflecting back with blinding intensity. The radio, my only companion, sputtered between static-laced country tunes and dead air. A tinny voice suddenly cut through, a local weather alert warning of hazardous driving conditions due to dense fog, especially in higher elevations and near waterways. Then, just before dissolving into a screech of interference, a faint, almost melodic warbling sound bled through, like distorted birdsong or malfunctioning electronics. It lasted only a second, prickling the hairs on my neck before vanishing back into the white noise. Probably just atmospheric interference, I told myself, gripping the wheel tighter. Nerves. My fuel gauge dipped towards empty, forcing a stop at the last outpost before the final stretch to town, a place called Harlan's Gas and Grub. It looked like something time forgot, its single pump illuminated by a buzzing fluorescent tube that cast flickering, greenish light on the swirling fog. An ancient, dented pickup truck idled near the shadows, its engine rumbling low. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fried food. A bell above the door chimed with pathetic insistence. Behind the counter, a man who looked as old and weathered as the surrounding hills watched me with pale, uninterested eyes. He wore faded overalls and a perpetually skeptical expression. "Just need gas," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet space. He nodded slowly, taking my card without a word. As the pump outside groaned to life, he leaned slightly over the counter, his gaze drifting towards the fog-obscured window. "Be careful out there tonight," he mumbled, his voice raspy, like stones grinding together. "Fog's sitting heavy." "Yeah, it's pretty thick," I agreed, trying for casual. He chewed on something unseen, his eyes narrowing. "Real heavy down by Black Creek Bridge. Folks see things. When it gets like this." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Eyes and whatnot." I forced a tight smile, my city-bred skepticism kicking in. Local legends. Every small town had them. Bigfoot, haunted houses, mysterious lights. Blackwood Creek's special was the Mothman, a half-baked boogeyman story tied to some bridge collapse decades ago, fueled by isolation and maybe too much moonshine. "Right. Thanks for the warning," I said, retrieving my card. He just grunted, turning back to wipe down the already spotless counter. As I pushed the door open, The idling pickup truck's engine suddenly revved, its headlights cutting briefly through the fog before it pulled away, heading back the way I'd come. Odd. Back in the car, the encounter left a residue of unease I couldn't quite shake. Eyes and whatnot. Typical small-town spook talk, designed to rattle outsiders or maybe just fill the silence. Still, the fog seemed to press in closer now, more personal, as I drove the final few miles towards the infamous bridge. The road dipped sharply, heading down towards the ravine Black Creek had carved over millennia. The air grew colder, heavier. My GPS, which had been spotty all evening, suddenly froze on a blank screen, the little blue dot pulsing uselessly in the middle of nowhere. The radio dissolved into pure, crackling static, loud and insistent, refusing to tune to any station. I switched it off, unnerved by the sound. Now, the silence was absolute, broken only by the low thrum of my engine and the rhythmic sweep of the wipers clearing condensation from the inside of the windshield. The fog here was a living entity, clinging to the trees, dripping from the skeletal branches that overhung the road. It reduced visibility to mere feet. I slowed the car to a crawl, peering intently into the white abyss. And then I saw it, the dark, skeletal outline of the Black Creek Bridge rising out of the mist ahead. An old steel truss bridge, built nearly a century ago, its paint peeling, rust blooming like angry sores on its girders. It spanned a deep, black chasm, the creek itself invisible far below. The bridge had always given me the creeps, even in broad daylight. Tonight, shrouded in fog, it looked like the entrance to somewhere else entirely. Somewhere you didn't want to go. Taking a deep breath, fighting down a sudden, inexplicable wave of anxiety, I eased the car onto the metal grating of the bridge deck. The tires hummed a different tune on the steel, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate up through the steering column. The fog was thickest here, swirling between the iron beams like trapped souls. Halfway across, the world ended. The engine didn't just sputter, it choked. A violent, metallic cough ripped through the silence, followed by an abrupt, total cessation of power. The car shuddered, coasting forward a few more yards on sheer momentum before rolling to a dead stop, precisely in the middle of the Black Creek Bridge. My headlights flickered once, twice, painting strobing, nightmarish shadows on the fog and girders, and then died completely. The dashboard lights winked out. Darkness slammed down like a physical blow. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed through me. No, 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 I whispered, fumbling for the ignition, turning the key uselessly. Nothing. Not even a click. Dead. Utterly, inexplicably dead. I reached for my phone, the screen's faint glow a pathetic island in the consuming blackness. No signal. Of course. Out here, in the dead zone, on this bridge, in this fog. I was trapped. Alone. Suspended over a black abyss I couldn't even see. The silence that rushed in to fill the void left by the engine was profound, unnatural. No crickets, no wind, not even the distant rush of the creek below. Just an absolute, pressing stillness that felt heavier than the fog. My own breathing sounded ragged and deafening in the confines of the car. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the void. Then came the feeling. It wasn't just fear of being stranded, this was something deeper, more primal. A wave of pure, unadulterated dread washed over me, so potent it felt like a physical pressure against my skin. It was the feeling of being watched. Intensely. By something ancient and fundamentally other. The air inside the car grew cold, my breath misting in front of my face despite the windows being closed. A low, vibrational hum started, almost subliminal at first, like the thrumming of immense power lines, but deeper, resonant. It seemed to emanate from the bridge structure itself, from the air, from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It wasn't just a sound, I could feel it in the fillings of my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. Mingled with it, almost imperceptibly, was a faint, high-pitched electronic screeching, like nails on a digital chalkboard, that scraped at the edges of my hearing. My eyes strained against the oppressive darkness, trying to penetrate the thick fog beyond the windshield. And then I saw them. High up. Near the peak of the bridge's steel superstructure, suspended in the swirling white void ahead. 2 points of light. Not reflections, not warning beacons. They were intensely bright, a burning, ruby red. They didn't flicker or waver like flames. They just glowed. Like embers fanned by some unseen breath. They were too high, too steady, too red to be car lights or anything mundane. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Every instinct screamed danger, but my body was locked in place, a statue carved from ice. The gas station attendant's words echoed in my mind, eyes and whatnot. The red lights seemed to pulse slightly with the low hum vibrating through the bridge. Then, slowly, unnervingly, they began to descend. Not drifting, but moving with a deliberate, impossible smoothness through the fog. Lower and lower they came, until they were roughly level with the top of my windshield, perhaps 30 yards ahead. As they descended, the fog swirled around them, momentarily thinning, offering glimpses of the form to which they belonged. It was huge. Far larger than a man. A silhouette, dark against the slightly less dark fog, vaguely humanoid in shape but distorted, elongated. I caught impressions rather than clear details: broad, heavy shoulders, a disproportionately large torso, and something else. Things attached to its back, folded, immense. Wings? The suggestion was there, vast and leathery, hinted at by the way the fog curled around the impossible shape. It made no aggressive move. It didn't rush towards the car or make threatening gestures. It simply hung there in the air, partially obscured by the mist and the complex geometry of the bridge girders, and watched me. Those two enormous, unblinking red eyes bored into the car, seeming to pierce the darkness, the metal, the glass, fixing directly on me. There was no discernible face, just the overwhelming presence and those burning, intelligent eyes. The dread intensified, becoming a suffocating pressure in my chest. I felt stripped bare, analyzed, my deepest fears laid open under that crimson gaze. A faint, rhythmic clicking sound reached my ears, soft but distinct, like chitinous parts rubbing together. Or maybe it was the sound of giant claws flexing on the cold steel above. Beneath it, almost too low to hear, was a whisper, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, or the sigh of enormous, leathery wings shifting slightly in the still air. Time seemed to stretch, distorting into an agonizing eternity. Every second dripped past like cold molasses. I sat frozen, staring into those hypnotic red eyes, unable to scream, unable to look away. My mind struggled to categorize it, to fit it into any known box: animal, machine, hallucination, but it defied all logic. It felt ancient, alien, a being completely outside the realm of human understanding. And then, as abruptly as it had appeared, it was gone. There was no sound of departure, no rush of air. The red eyes simply weren't there anymore. One moment they burned in the fog, the next, there was only the swirling white emptiness. The clicking stopped. The whisper of wings ceased. The intense, paralyzing dread vanished instantly, ripped away as if a switch had been flipped. The sudden absence of that terror was almost as shocking as its presence. An echoing silence descended again, but this time it felt different. Less absolute, more normal. Just the quiet of a foggy night on an empty bridge. I sat there for a moment, trembling violently, gasping for air. My mind raced, trying to process the impossible. Had I imagined it? Stress? Fatigue? The fog playing tricks? But the feeling. The sheer, paralyzing terror, the physical sensation of the hum, the undeniable presence of those eyes. No. That was real. As if on cue, the dashboard lights flickered back to life. With a sudden, explosive cough, the engine roared back into existence, settling into a rough but steady idle. The headlights blazed on, cutting through the fog once more. I didn't need a second invitation. My foot slammed the accelerator before the conscious thought even fully formed. The tires spun for a terrifying second on the wet metal grating, then caught. The car lurched forward, engine roaring in protest but obeying. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. My eyes were fixed on the cone of light ahead, focused solely on getting off that god-forsaken bridge. The girders flashed past, dark iron skeletons whipping by in the fog. The transition back onto solid asphalt felt like crossing a threshold, escaping some localized pocket of nightmare. I didn't slow down. I pushed the old sedan harder than I probably should have, engine whining, tires squealing faintly on the slick curves leading away from the ravine. The fog seemed reluctant to let go, clinging to the car, but gradually thinning as I gained elevation. Only when the first familiar, watery streetlights of Blackwood Creek's outskirts pierced the gloom did I ease off the gas, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I pulled over onto the muddy shoulder, heart still jackhammering against my ribs, breath coming in ragged gasps. "Okay, Sarah, okay," I whispered, leaning my forehead against the cool plastic of the steering wheel. "Get it together. What the hell was that?" My rational mind scrambled for explanations. An elaborate prank? Kids with drones and red LEDs? But the engine failure? The sheer size of the thing? The palpable dread? No prank could replicate that feeling, that bone-deep certainty of being in the presence of something utterly unnatural. An owl? Some huge owl with reflective eyes caught in the fog? Preposterous. The shape was wrong, the presence was wrong. Stress-induced hallucination? Possible, I conceded grudgingly. The drive, the worry about my father, the return to this place. It was a potent cocktail for psychological distress. But it felt too real, too specific. The red eyes burned behind my eyelids even now. I finally coaxed my trembling legs to carry me the last few blocks to my aunt's house, where I was staying. The small, tidy clapboard house looked exactly the same as it had 8 years ago, a bulwark of suffocating normalcy against the strangeness of the night. Aunt Carol met me at the door, her face etched with worry that shifted to relief, then back to concern as she saw the state I was in. "Sarah. Good heavens, child, you look like you've seen a ghost." We were getting worried. "Just bad fog," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Car trouble on the bridge." "Black Creek Bridge?" Her brow furrowed. "That old thing. Always trouble. Lucky you got it started again." She ushered me inside, tut-tutting about the dangers of night driving in the mountains. Later, tucked into the too-soft bed in the spare room that still held echoes of my teenage self, the real aftershocks began. A blinding headache pulsed behind my eyes, a sharp, localized pain that felt different from any tension headache I'd ever had. It felt centered, focused. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red glow against the fog, felt the suffocating dread wash over me again. The silence of the house seemed pregnant, charged. The digital clock on the nightstand emitted a low, almost imperceptible hum that grated on my nerves. When I picked up my phone to check the time again, the screen flickered, displaying a brief pattern of static before returning to normal. My laptop, sitting closed on the desk, made a faint clicking sound, like the hard drive was engaging for no reason. Coincidence? Nerves? Or something else? In the thin light of dawn, filtering gray and unwelcome through the lace curtains, I looked in the mirror. Pale face, dark circles under my eyes. And something else. In the periphery of my vision, just as I turned away, I caught a fleeting glimpse of tiny red dots, like laser pointers, dancing at the edge of my sight. When I snapped my head back, they were gone. After images? I strain? Or echoes of those burning eyes on the bridge? The thought of reporting what I saw flickered through my mind and died instantly. Report what, exactly? "Excuse me, deputy, I think I saw a giant, man-shaped something with red eyes and maybe wings on the bridge last night. Oh, and it made my car die and then restart. They'd laugh me out of the station. Or worse, they'd give me that pitying look reserved for the stressed, the grieving, the potentially unstable. The girl who fled town only to come back seeing monsters in the fog. No. I couldn't face that. Later that morning, needing coffee and a dose of normalcy, I stopped by the sheriff's department to check in, a courtesy expected in a town this size when family was involved. Deputy Miller was on duty, a man whose face seemed permanently set in lines of weary patience. He was maybe 10 years older than me, had probably seen it all in Blackwood Creek, twice. "Sarah Jenkins," he said, recognition dawning slowly. "Heard you were back. Sorry about your dad." "Thanks, deputy," I replied, forcing a casual tone. "Just came from the hospital. He's stable, at least." I hesitated, then plunged ahead, trying to sound nonchalant. "Say, is there usually trouble with car electronics out on Black Creek Bridge? Mine completely died out there last night. Middle of the bridge, pitch black, fog thick as soup. Gave me quite a scare." I kept my description vague, focusing on the car trouble. Miller leaned back in his squeaky chair, rubbing his chin. "Black Creek Bridge?" He sighed. "Yeah, that relic's got more ghosts than girders. We get calls now and then. Bad cell reception, radios cutting out, sometimes engines act funny. Atmospheric conditions, probably. Or maybe just old wiring giving up the ghost." He shrugged. "Fog does weird things to signals out in that ravine. Heard stories about strange lights too, but usually it turns out to be kids messing around with flashlights or drones these days." He gave me a dismissive, slightly patronizing smile. "Glad you got moving again. Drive safe now." Dismissed. Just like I knew I would be. Filed under local color and foggy night. He didn't ask about the kind of lights. He didn't register the lingering tremor in my voice. But as I walked out into the weak morning sun, the headache pulsed behind my eyes, and the world felt subtly different. As if the encounter on the bridge hadn't just scared me, but had somehow retuned me, leaving behind a faint, persistent static hum just beneath the surface of reality. And the unsettling feeling that whatever I saw on that bridge wasn't entirely gone. The next few days blurred into a routine dictated by hospital visiting hours and the suffocating embrace of small-town life. Visiting my father was draining, his frustration at his own frailty manifested as sharp, barbed comments, his silences echoing the distance that had always defined our relationship. Away from the sterile quiet of the hospital room, Blackwood Creek itself seemed to press in on me. It wasn't just the overt scrutiny, the sideways glances in the grocery store, the hushed conversations that paused when I walked past, the pitying smiles from people who remembered me as a gangly teenager. That was expected. This was different. It was a deeper, more pervasive feeling of being observed. Not just by human eyes, but by something else. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck when I walked down empty streets, the feeling of unseen attention filtering through the trees bordering my aunt's yard, the sudden, unnerving silence of birds when I passed certain spots. My heightened state of anxiety, I told myself. Grief, stress, lack of sleep. Perfectly logical explanations. Yet, the feeling persisted, a low-level thrum of unease beneath the surface of everyday interactions. And then, the other things started. Subtle at first, easy to dismiss. I'd be walking downtown, past the struggling storefronts, and notice a streetlight flicker erratically just moments before hearing the screech of tires and the crunch of metal from a minor fender bender around the corner. I'd be watching the local news at my aunt's house, the picture dissolving into a burst of snow and static exactly when the reporter announced unexpected layoffs at the old textile mill on the edge of town, the town's precarious economic lifeline. Animals seemed agitated around me, dogs would whine and back away, cats would arch their backs and hiss for no apparent reason before bolting. These weren't clear visions or prophetic voices. They were moments of intense, jarring sensitivity. A sudden spike in the background static that seemed to hum just beneath my hearing. A flash of the same cold, paralyzing dread I'd felt on the bridge, tied inexplicably to a specific place or person, immediately preceding some minor misfortune. One afternoon, walking near the elementary school, a wave of that dread washed over me, so strong I stumbled on the sidewalk. It was focused, somehow, on a particular house across the street, a modest bungalow with peeling paint. Seconds later, smoke began curling from an upstairs window. A frantic woman burst out the front door, screaming about a kitchen fire. It was small, contained quickly by the volunteer fire department, but the timing, the feeling, shook me to my core. Another evening, visiting my father, the power in his entire hospital wing suddenly flickered and died, plunging the floor into emergency lighting. Just before it happened, I'd felt that familiar wave of anxiety, a sickening lurch in my stomach coupled with the faint, high-pitched electronic whine I'd heard on the bridge. Nurses scrambled, patients fretted, but all I could feel was a terrifying sense of connection, as if my internal antenna had picked up the signal of impending disruption. Later, I overheard a maintenance worker muttering about a freak surge, inexplicable. These incidents were terrifyingly isolating. How could I explain this? I get bad feelings right before minor accidents happen? I sounded like a lunatic. The rational journalist in me fought against it, desperately seeking mundane correlations, but the pattern was becoming undeniable. The dread was the key, the same specific, soul-chilling dread from the bridge encounter. Troubled and increasingly unnerved, I found myself drawn to the one place in town that seemed to trade in the currency of the unexplained, Elsie's Antiques and Curiosities. Elsie Caldwell ran the shop, a tiny, cluttered space smelling of dust, lemon oil, and history. She was an institution in Blackwood Creek, ancient and sharp-eyed, rumored to know everything about everyone, past and present. She'd known my grandmother, maybe even my great-grandmother. She was the town's unofficial historian and keeper of its darker folklore. The bell above Elsie's door jingled as I entered. She looked up from polishing a tarnished silver locket, her bright blue eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, pinning me instantly. "Sarah Jenkins. Haven't seen you in. Well, it's been a while." Her voice was surprisingly strong, layered with the Appalachian cadence. "Heard about your father. Sad business." "Thank you, Elsie. He's holding on." I browsed aimlessly, running my fingers over dusty porcelain dolls and chipped enamelware, trying to work up the nerve. "Actually, Elsie," I began, attempting a casual tone, "I was driving in the other night, over Black Creek Bridge." Her hand stilled on the locket. She didn't look up immediately. "That bridge," she said softly. "Always been a crossing point, hasn't it? Not just over the creek." "Well, the fog was terrible," I continued, feeling foolish. "And I was just wondering. You hear all sorts of stories about that bridge. Local legends, you know?" Elsie finally looked up, her gaze shrewd, penetrating. She seemed to weigh my words, looking for something beneath the surface. Legends? She echoed. Some call them legends. Some call them warnings. She set the locket down carefully. Folks have seen things out there for generations. Lights, shadows. Things that don't belong. Like the Mothman? I asked, the name feeling clumsy on my tongue. A flicker of something, caution? Recognition? Crossed her face. That's one name they put to it. The tall shadow with eyes of fire. Usually shows up before bad times. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. But the stories. They ain't just about seeing the thing, child. The bridge itself. It's a thin place. A place where trouble gathers, like static before a storm. Some say the creature is drawn to it. Some say it brings it. She paused, watching my reaction intently. And some folks. Folks who have a real close encounter out there, especially when the veil is thin, like in a thick fog. They come away changed. My heart gave a painful thump. Changed how? I whispered. Elsie picked up her polishing cloth again, her movements slow, deliberate. They get attuned, she said, her voice dropping further. Sensitive. They feel things coming. See the signs nobody else does. Little warnings. A flicker here, a bad feeling there, she sighed, a dry, rustling sound. Most folks call them crazy. Cursed, even. Say they draw the trouble themselves. She finally met my eyes again, her expression a mixture of sympathy and grim knowledge. It ain't an easy burden to carry, being marked by a thing like that. Attuned. The word resonated with horrifying clarity, echoing the strange sensitivities, the flashes of dread, the feeling of being connected to the town's unfolding misfortunes. I hadn't just seen something on that bridge. Something on that bridge had seen me. And it had left its mark. Elsie's words haunted me. Attuned. Marked. They echoed the fragmented anxieties coalescing in my own mind. Back in the suffocating quiet of my aunt's spare room, I pulled out my reporter's notebook, not for a story, but for survival. I started documenting everything. The date and time of the bridge encounter. The engine failure, the red eyes, the dread. Then, chronologically, the subsequent incidents, the flickering streetlight before the fender bender, the TV static before the layoff news, the feeling of being watched, the animals' reactions, the dread before the house fire, the hospital power outage. Alongside each entry, I noted the accompanying physical or sensory phenomena, the persistent headache behind my eyes, the fleeting peripheral red dots, the bursts of static, the waves of specific, localized dread. Laid out in black and white, the pattern was undeniable, terrifying. The encounter on Black Creek Bridge hadn't been an isolated event, a terrifying night forgotten in the light of day. It was a demarcation point. A switch had been flipped. Elsie wasn't just spinning local yarn, she had described my exact experience. The idea of being attuned resonated with a chilling accuracy that stripped away my last vestiges of skepticism. The fear shifted, becoming something colder, more insidious. Was I merely predicting trouble? Or was I somehow connected to it? Elsie's mention of people being called cursed, accused of drawing the trouble themselves, that terrified me most. Was the entity on the bridge a harbinger, or was its presence, its observation of me, somehow imprinting me, making me a focal point for negativity? Was I marked? The physical symptoms worsened. The headache behind my eyes became a near-constant companion, a dull, throbbing pressure that spiked with the flashes of dread. My sensitivity to certain stimuli increased. High-frequency sounds, the whine of old electronics, the buzz of fluorescent lights, became physically painful, grating on my nerves. Bright lights, especially sudden flashes, left me disoriented, the phantom red dots dancing in my vision more frequently. Sleep offered no escape. When I did manage to drift off, nightmares plagued me. Not replays of the bridge encounter, but fragmented, visceral horrors, the sensation of falling endlessly into fog-shrouded darkness, staring into huge, luminous red eyes that filled my entire field of vision, radiating not malice, but cold, terrifying indifference, the feeling of being smothered by static, a physical weight pressing down on my chest, choking me. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in cold sweat, the low hum of dread vibrating within me. One morning, getting dressed, I noticed them. Faint, bruise-like discolorations on my left shoulder blade and forearm. They weren't distinct bruises from an impact, they were strange, mottled patterns, almost like faint Lichtenberg figures, the fractal patterns left by lightning strikes, or the intricate veining on an insect's wing. Or maybe, like the visual representation of static interference. They didn't hurt, but their appearance, coupled with everything else, felt like a physical manifestation of the invisible mark I now carried. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I turned to the tool I knew best: research. I bypassed the sensationalist websites peddling blurry photos and wild speculation about the Mothman. Instead, I dug deeper, searching academic databases, folklore archives, obscure forums dedicated to high strangeness, looking for patterns beyond the creature itself. What I found was unsettlingly consistent with my own experience, yet rarely highlighted in the mainstream Mothman narrative. Yes, there were the sightings, the large, winged figure, the glowing red eyes. But woven through the accounts, often buried in footnotes or dismissed as subjective witness stress, were recurring reports of associated phenomena: localized electronic interference, car trouble, radio static, phone glitches, intense feelings of inexplicable dread reported by witnesses before and during sightings, premonitory sensations or dreams preceding local disasters or accidents, and lingering psychological distress, anxiety, paranoia, insomnia, sensory hypersensitivity, in those who claimed close encounters. I found scattered, lesser-known reports from other regions, places plagued by their own localized legends of strange aerial phenomena or window area activity. Accounts from rural Pennsylvania, the desolate plains of Texas, even parts of the Pacific Northwest, described similar after-effects in witnesses: the feeling of being marked, the development of an unwanted sensitivity to impending negative events, the electronic anomalies, the specific headaches, the nightmares. It wasn't just Point Pleasant, West Virginia, 1966. It was a recurring pattern, a syndrome almost, linked to encounters with entities that seemed less like biological creatures and more like localized disturbances in reality itself. The research didn't bring comfort. It solidified my terror. This wasn't just in my head. It wasn't just Blackwood Creek folklore. It was something real, something that left psychic and perhaps even physical scars. The Mothman wasn't just a monster to be feared during a brief encounter, it was a catalyst, and I had been caught in its wake, fundamentally altered. The static was inside me now. The low-level hum of anxiety became my constant companion, a background radiation buzz beneath the surface of my thoughts. Blackwood Creek, once merely stifling, now felt actively hostile, charged with a latent energy I seemed uniquely tuned to perceive. The flashes of dread, previously linked to minor, localized incidents, began to escalate in intensity and scope. They weren't specific visions, but powerful, gut-wrenching waves of the bridge dread, now tinged with a broader sense of impending scale. One wave hit me while driving past the skeletal remains of the old Decker mine headquarters on the edge of town, the town's largest, albeit struggling, employer. It wasn't linked to a specific person or event, but to the entire decaying structure, a feeling of profound instability and imminent collapse, not just physical, but economic. Whispers around town about safety violations and potential closure suddenly felt less like rumor and more like prophecy. Another flash struck during a sudden, violent thunderstorm that rolled in with unnatural speed, unleashing torrential rain and cracking lightning directly over the town. The dread wasn't just fear of the storm, but a feeling that the weather itself was wrong, unbalanced, a symptom of a larger disturbance. News reports later spoke of flash flooding risks in the lower hollows, dangerously close to residential areas. The tension within the community, always simmering beneath the surface in an economically depressed town, felt sharper, more brittle. Arguments overheard in the diner seemed louder, angrier. Glances exchanged on the street held less weary resignation and more simmering resentment. I felt it all, amplified, the negativity resonating within me like a struck tuning fork. It mirrored the nauseating build-up of pressure I'd felt approaching the bridge that first night, only now it seemed to emanate from the entire town. My personal electronic sphere became a circus of glitches. My phone would frequently display screens filled with swirling static patterns, sometimes resolving into shapes vaguely reminiscent of wings or eyes before resetting. Aunt Carol's television, when I was in the room, would randomly switch channels, often landing on documentaries about natural disasters, structural collapses, or historical tragedies, punctuated by bursts of loud static. The radio in my car became almost unusable. It wasn't just interference anymore, it was targeted noise. Driving anywhere near the bridge, even miles away, would trigger bursts of the same high-pitched, electronic screeching I'd heard during the encounter, cutting through music or talk radio with painful intensity. It felt directed at me, a reminder, a warning, or maybe just a symptom of the same field disturbance that had killed my engine. The force I encountered on the bridge wasn't confined there, it felt like it was bleeding out, infecting my surroundings, using technology as its conduit. My deteriorating state didn't go unnoticed. Aunt Carol watched me with growing concern, mistaking my jumpiness, my insomnia, and my visible distress for prolonged grief and stress over my father. "Sarah, honey," she'd say gently, "maybe you need to talk to someone. Or maybe it's time for you to head back to the city. This town. It's hard on people, especially now." Her concern was genuine, but it only amplified my sense of isolation. How could I explain the truth? Deputy Miller called once, a brief, non-committal follow-up. "Just wanted to let you know, Sarah, had one of the boys check out the wiring on Black Creek Bridge after you mentioned your car trouble. Didn't find anything obvious. Like I said, probably just the fog and old systems." He paused. "You doing okay? Heard you seemed a bit rattled." His tone was professional, but underneath, I sensed the familiar dismissal, the filing away of my report under stressed woman, unreliable witness. He found nothing because he wasn't looking for the right thing. I felt utterly trapped. Every nerve ending screamed at me to flee Blackwood Creek, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that bridge, that entity, this growing sense of doom. Run back to the anonymity of the city, try to bury the experience, dismiss the attunement as trauma-induced hypervigilance. But another part of me, the part marked by the encounter, felt a terrifying sense of responsibility. If these feelings, this dread, were truly linked to impending events, could I just leave? Ignore the growing storm I felt gathering over this town, centered somewhere near that cursed bridge? Leaving felt like abandoning people to a danger only I seemed sensitive to. Staying felt like inviting madness, like allowing the paranoia and the relentless dread to consume me entirely. The choice itself felt like a tightening knot in my chest, mirroring the pressure building in the town around me. It hit me late one evening, a few days later. Not a gradual buildup, but a sudden, overwhelming tsunami of dread, far stronger than any premonition I'd experienced since the initial encounter. It was the bridge dread, amplified tenfold, a suffocating certainty that something major, something catastrophic, was about to happen. Now. Tonight. There was no specific vision, no clear image of disaster, just an all-consuming feeling of imminent crisis, radiating outwards from a single focal point, Black Creek Bridge. The air in my aunt's house felt thick, charged, vibrating with the same low hum I had felt that night. The lights flickered weakly. Outside, a thick, unnatural fog was rolling in again, swallowing the streetlights, muffling the world. My logical mind screamed at me to stay put, lock the doors, hide under the bed. This wasn't my problem. I was leaving soon. I couldn't stop whatever was coming. But the pull, the feeling of being intrinsically linked to this impending event, was irresistible. It wasn't a conscious decision, it was a compulsion, born of terror and a desperate, inexplicable need to witness, to understand, maybe even to intervene, though I had no idea how. Or perhaps, simply, to confront the source of the mark I carried. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my car keys, ignoring Aunt Carol's sleepy query from the living room. Outside, the fog was as dense as it had been that first night, visibility near zero. Driving felt instinctive, my body moving on autopilot while my mind raced with frantic, disjointed thoughts. As I turned onto the winding road leading down to the ravine, the car radio, which I hadn't even turned on, crackled to life, emitting that same piercing, high-frequency screech, louder and more insistent than ever before. It felt like a siren, pulling me towards the bridge. The skeletal silhouette of the Black Creek Bridge loomed out of the white wall, looking even more menacing than before. The fog swirled thickly around its rusted girders. My headache pulsed violently behind my eyes. The dread was almost unbearable now, a physical weight pressing down on me. Driven by the terrible compulsion, I didn't stop at the approach. I eased the car onto the bridge deck, the tires humming on the metal grating. Halfway across, in almost the exact spot where my car had died before, I stopped, killing the engine myself this time. The radio screech cut off abruptly, plunging the world back into that unnerving, fog-laden silence. I sat there, heart pounding, scanning the thick white curtain ahead, half expecting to see those burning red eyes materialize. But nothing appeared. The air vibrated with tension, with the feeling of immense energy gathered, held precariously in check. Then, I heard it. Not the electronic hum this time, but a deep, groaning sound. Metal fatigue. It came from the bridge structure itself, a low, protesting rumble that spoke of decades of neglect, stress, and decay. It sounded like the old bridge was sighing under an immense strain, perhaps worsened by the recent torrential rains, perhaps just finally reaching its breaking point. Suddenly, headlights cut through the fog from the opposite end of the bridge. They were moving fast, too fast for these conditions. Simultaneously, another set of headlights appeared behind me, also approaching rapidly. Two vehicles, speeding towards each other on a narrow, fog-bound bridge with zero visibility. Time seemed to slow. I saw it unfold like a nightmare. The screech of tires, the desperate blare of a horn cutting through the fog. A sickening crunch of metal on metal seemed inevitable. This was it. The disaster. The bridge, weakened, potentially unstable, now the site of a horrific collision. But then, a miracle, or perhaps just blind luck. The oncoming car swerved violently at the last second, its tires screaming, scraping against the bridge railing with a shower of sparks. The car behind me slammed on its brakes, fishtailing wildly but managing to avoid a rear-end collision. For a heart-stopping moment, the two vehicles were stopped, mere feet apart, headlights illuminating the swirling fog between them, drivers likely frozen in shock and adrenaline. The immediate crisis, the collision, had been averted by sheer chance. In that moment of suspended chaos, illuminated by the trapped headlights, I looked up. High above, perched on the very peak of the steel superstructure, almost invisible against the darkness and fog, was the silhouette. Massive, vaguely man-shaped, with the suggestion of immense, folded wings. It was utterly still, impassive. And the eyes. 2 points of intense, burning red light, reflecting the frantic headlights below. It wasn't causing the near miss, it wasn't intervening. It was simply watching. Observing the unfolding human drama, the convergence of recklessness, neglect, and near tragedy at this specific point in space and time. As the drivers cautiously began to maneuver their vehicles, backing up slowly, the tension of the immediate crisis eased slightly. And as it did, the figure above seemed to fade. It didn't fly away, it dissolved back into the fog and the darkness, the red eyes extinguishing like dying embers. Gone. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The Mothman, or whatever it was, wasn't the source of the danger. It wasn't a malevolent entity orchestrating disaster, nor was it necessarily a benevolent warning system. It was drawn to these points of fracture, these moments of intense negative energy, potential tragedy, and structural weakness. Like a scavenger drawn to a dying animal, or perhaps more accurately, like an amplifier, its very presence warping perception, heightening tension, leaving residual psychic energy in its wake. My attunement, the dread, the sensitivities, they weren't a message from it, but a side effect of it, an echo of its powerful, reality-distorting presence. It was a witness to collapse, not the cause. And I had become sensitive to its frequency. The immediate, suffocating dread receded as the two cars carefully navigated their way off the bridge in opposite directions, leaving me alone once more in the fog. The familiar low hum of background anxiety remained, a constant reminder, but the acute sense of imminent catastrophe had passed. Shaking, I restarted my car. It turned over immediately this time, and slowly drove off the bridge, back towards the dubious safety of town. I did call it in. Not the figure, of course. I reported the near miss, the dangerous driving, the concerning groan from the bridge structure, emphasizing the treacherous conditions caused by the fog. I spoke to Deputy Miller again, keeping my voice level, factual. 2 cars nearly had a head-on, middle of Black Creek Bridge, I said. Fog's impossible out there. And Deputy. That bridge sounded bad. Really bad. Like it was under serious strain. There was a pause on the line. All right, Sarah, Miller said, his voice lacking its usual dismissive edge. Thanks for the heads up. We'll check it out. You okay? Fine, I lied. Just thought you should know. When I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that his final question held more weight this time, that maybe, just maybe, he'd heard the tremor beneath the surface. Or maybe he was just tired of calls about that damn bridge. My father's condition stabilized enough for me to justify leaving. There were no tearful goodbyes, no reconciliation. Just the familiar, aching distance, now overlaid with the new, invisible burdens I carried. I packed my bags quickly, efficiently. Aunt Carol hugged me tightly at the door, her eyes full of unspoken worry. Take care of yourself, Sarah, she whispered. This time, leaving Blackwood Creek felt different. Not like an escape, but like a strategic retreat. I needed distance, not just from the town and my family history, but from the epicenter of the phenomenon that had marked me. I drove away under a clear, crisp autumn sky, the fog having completely dissipated, leaving the mountains stark and beautiful against the blue. But the clarity was only external. Inside, the static remained. Months later, I was back in the city, immersed in the comforting chaos and anonymity. I threw myself into work, chasing stories, framing the world through my camera lens, trying to recapture the skeptical detachment that had once defined me. I tried to rebuild the walls, to convince myself the experience in Blackwood Creek was a product of grief, stress, and the power of suggestion amplified by local folklore. But the sensitivity lingered. It was fainter now, less insistent, but undeniably present. A sudden, sharp pang of dread before witnessing a minor traffic accident on a busy street. An inexplicable unease near old buildings that later appeared on the news due to structural issues or fires. A sensitivity to flickering lights or electronic interference that seemed to precede bad news reports. I found myself subconsciously avoiding bridges, especially old steel ones. Heavy fog made my skin crawl. Places with known histories of tragedy felt physically uncomfortable, humming with a low-level negativity I couldn't ignore. The mark was permanent. The attunement was real. One evening, walking home late through the city canyons of glass and steel, I stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light. The night was clear, the city lights reflecting off the towering skyscrapers. My gaze drifted upwards, towards the dark windows of a massive office building across the street. Near the top, a red antenna light pulsed rhythmically. And for one heart-stopping, paralyzing second, below the antenna light, against the dark glass, I saw them. Two faint, distant, pinpricks of ruby red light. Unblinking. Watching. I gasped, stumbling back, my blood running cold. My eyes locked onto the spot, searching frantically. But they were gone. Vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Just the dark windows, the pulsing red antenna light, the indifferent city skyline. Was it real? Or just a phantom echo, my traumatized mind projecting the memory onto the urban landscape? It didn't matter. Real or imagined, the message was clear. Distance provided no sanctuary. The encounter on Black Creek Bridge wasn't just a story I'd witnessed or reported on. It was a story I now carried within me, etched into my senses, forever tuning me to the frequency of dread, forever followed by the eyes that watch from the shadows just beyond the veil. Enjoyed this story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.